Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hughes User Group webinar series. We have a special session on a topic which is perhaps one of the top search phrases on the internet these days, especially in these days. We're pleased to have with us Lynn Loignon, who is a former big brand retail executive and currently a leading consultant on this topic. She has given a lot of talks. She has written a lot of stuff on corporate communications. And she'll talk about transforming a corporate culture through internal communications. Folks, corporate culture is a solid foundation of any successful business. And the employees who are the brand ambassadors of a business reflect company values and help build the brand image of any business. My name is Shahid Javed. I'm with HughesON Enterprise Team, and I'll be your host and moderator for today's presentation. Before we get started, I'll go over a few housekeeping items. We are going to record this webinar, and we will make it available for on-demand viewing on our website, which is hughesusergroup.org. Also, if you notice, there's a chat box right on top of your screen. So you can click on chat, and you can chat with myself, with Lynn, or with anyone on the team, and type in your questions. And we'll session, which is at the end of the presentation. If we run out of time, or if you may be viewing this recorded version of the webinar, please feel free to drop us an email or by simply filling out a form on our website. Lynn, thank you for joining us, and we welcome you to our session today. Can you please start by telling us a little bit about yourself? I mean, I've read your background. It's an exciting background. And give us the inside scoop on best practices, the do's and the don'ts on how corporate culture can be transformed through communications. Lynn, take it away.
All right, great. Thank you so much. And good morning, everyone. And it may be afternoon for you, so my apologies. I'm on the West Coast. So I am Lynn Loignon. I'm thrilled to be here today. As Shahid mentioned, I am currently consulting, which I've actually been doing now since last August. Prior to that, I was an executive director of operations at Raley's, which, if you're not familiar, it's a regional privately owned grocer here in Northern California and Nevada with about 130 stores. Prior to Raley's, I worked for Kohl's for just over 20 years. My last role at Kohl's was VP of Internal Communications, but I grew up in the stores, started as an assistant manager, was a store manager, ran stores in Minnesota, Colorado, and Wisconsin. I was then a district manager, and then I had quite a few roles in the corporate environment as well, in communications, operations, best practices, and ending with that VP of Internal Communications. I'm really excited to have this opportunity to share with you today how I have evolved communications in quite a few different roles at Kohl's and as well at Raley's. So during this session, we'll talk about how to transform a corporate culture through internal communications. So, what do I mean by that? I want to focus on developing communication strategies that move beyond a culture of one-way communications, create a culture of listening and acting that supports a shared vision of communication, bridge the gap between internal and external communication channels, integrating brand identity, humanizing internal communications to engage employees and create brand ambassadors, and then lastly, empowering leaders with the information that they need to be authentic communicators and ensure that their employees have the information that they need to do their job. So the challenge, if you think about most large organizations, employees are spread across the country, region, working in stores, restaurants, distribution centers, credit centers, corporate offices, etc. Some work behind a computer sitting at a desk. Some are interacting with customers all day. Some work behind the scenes with product and processes. And this really requires the function to employ a variety of traditional and new communication tools and content to drive engagement with those employees. And as Shahid mentioned, communication and engagement are so critical anytime, but especially now with the spread of COVID-19. So on the next slide, as you know, most companies do an employee engagement survey, large, small, whatever the companies are. And in my experience at Kohl's and Raley's, we did them annually. And when we started doing them at Kohl's, I can remember our first score was a 68%, which was below the Connexa norm of 73%. And to Kohl's, we wanted to be the best, so we were definitely not happy with that. And when we drilled down to communication within engagement, we had a 59% favorable response to the question, I received the information and communication I need to do my job effectively. And a 53% on the question, at our organization, there's open and honest two-way communication. What I've learned in the different organizations that I've worked in is communication, recognition, and development are always the top priorities for employees when we're talking about engagement. In regards to communication specifically, employees don't feel informed and armed with the information they need to talk with customers, all of whom are potential associates, friends and family, all of whom are potential customers and potential associates, and most importantly, in each other. Next slide. I also know that organizations need to do a better job of equipping employees with the information they need to feel informed and appreciated and understand the purpose of their work and the work of their team members. Companies need to answer the question, what's my purpose? Why am I important? If you look at this image here, in our everyday lives, we receive communication information in so many different places through many different tools and technologies. And we really get to choose how we want to get that information. Employees expect to receive communication similarly to how they take in information in their personal lives. And, those of us that have been in that communications function know how challenging that can be. And most communication strategies and channels have not supported this type of easily finding information that you want. So you have to get creative and develop a plan on how to address that issue. Next slide. Also, employees tell us that they expect to hear communication from their company before or at the same time as they hear it externally. I want to share a little example from when I was at Kohl's. I'll never forget this little mishap we had. At the time, VP of Communication and Implementation for stores. I started my day like any other day, dropping my kids off at the daycare in the basement, and I ran into somebody from her team, and she mentioned she was getting calls from the stores, district and regional managers about a credit center opening in Texas. And honestly, I had no idea what she was talking about. When I got to my desk, I had voicemails, a stack of messages about this credit center opening. And long story short, Credit Center was opening soon in San Antonio, and our teams in Texas were getting questions for customers. Customers knew the Credit Center was coming because our PR and talent management team shared the story to get good PR, begin hiring employees to staff the Credit Center. But what they forgot to do was to connect with us to inform store employees. Why? Why didn't they do that? Well, when I asked why, they said that they didn't feel store associates needed to know. It didn't have anything to do with them, right? Well, wrong. Why communicate it to them? Well, obviously, it had an impact on them, and you don't want to make assumptions, and it's important for employees to know the news before sharing the news publicly. If you think about it, if you were one of those employers, even if you're a district manager, store manager, you're being asked about this and you don't know what's happening in your company, but your customers do. It kind of makes you feel silly. So, connecting back to kind of our larger challenge, it's pretty big. And how you connect with a distributed workforce to create and transform your corporate culture is a big challenge. You need to equip them with the information they need and engage them at a deeper level, enabling them to become brand ambassadors ultimately. And while I've worked for many retailers, this challenge is not unique to retail. And I'm sure that some, if not all of you, are facing the same or similar challenges in your business. Next slide, please. So before we go further, I want to talk just a little bit about the companies I've worked for and how they evolved and aligned on their purpose. I assume most of you have been to a Kohl's, and when you think of Kohl's, I think there's certain words that come to people's mind. Brands, great brands, value, convenience. And for decades, Kohl's has been able to build success with that simple, compelling offering of great brands, value, and real convenience. And this worked for Kohl's. We were a national business and a brand loved by our customers. But over the last few years that I was there, it became more challenging for us to lead in the same way that we had before. Things were changing faster, competition was intensifying, consumer behavior had shifted, and expectations of speed and choice had evolved. So in a way, what used to set us apart no longer did. Similarly, at Raley's, a regional grocer based in Sacramento, they had always led the market in the region, and then suddenly new competition popped up and grocery as we knew it began to change. Because of that, we realized that we needed to truly understand what made us stand out and ensure our team members understood the change and how we fit into the new grocery era. Next slide. So at Kohl's, we took a step back and began to ask ourselves questions like, why do we exist? What can we do better than anyone else? And we set out to define a new purpose and focus for our collective efforts on the area of business that would differentiate and define Kohl's without losing our history. The new purpose and roadmap was called our Greatness Agenda. On the screen that our goal was to be the most engaging retailer in America, which is a pretty lofty goal. And in terms of our employees, we wanted to be famous for engaging, developing, and recognizing great teams. After defining that purpose, we knew it was critical then to think about how do we communicate that to our associates and how do we carry that message internally as well as external. As a communication function, it was our job to think about that then. How did we develop and introduce that greatness agenda, that new purpose for our organization? So we set out to create our vision for doing that. And on the screen, you can see we decided that we wanted to deliver internal communication that drives results by engaging employees, empowering leaders, and building a culture of transparency. Now, breaking that down a little bit, again, like I mentioned for the Greatness Agenda, we set this lofty goal and we wanted to do the same thing for communication. And we knew we had a huge opportunity because frankly, our communication was flat, boring. It was very clinical, I guess is how I would describe it. And we wanted to change that to delivering world-class internal communication. We wanted to make sure too in our vision that we connected it to results, because a lot of communicators, I think, at times don't think that they make an impact on sales. But ultimately, if you're engaging employees, they're going to engage with your customers. And at the end of the day, that's going to have an impact on sales. So we connected that drive result by engaging employees. And when we were talking about engaging employees, it's really more about how we're engaging them with our communication and how did we make that communication more entertaining, interesting, connect with them through that communication. We also knew that we needed to empower our leaders because a lot of communication, while a lot comes from the corporate office, a majority of communication really filters leaders. And our leaders, we didn't feel like we were setting them up for success. So we knew that we needed to provide them with information so that they'd be able to communicate authentically with their teams with the appropriate level of information. And lastly, building a culture of transparency. Really what we meant by that is we wanted to create a culture of two-way dialogue, make a connection with our teams, with our associates across the country, so that they felt that they were engaged with us and having more of a conversation instead of a one-way push of communication. So, thinking about this vision that we created, you can really translate this to almost any organization. If you take out, maybe you don't talk about your employees as employees, they're associates or they're team members. Replace leaders with managers or team leaders. Replace transparency with what's ever really important in your organization. But it's critical that you and your team understand your purpose, your goal, and about how you're going to get to that goal. Next slide. So what does this look like? How do you go about this process? Next slide. So the goal of inspiring and empowering employees, creating brand ambassadors for your business, again, although your goal may be slightly different, ultimately most communication teams are expected to get some or all of the following outcomes. So you'll know you accomplished your goal when your engagement increases, your employees are sharing via social channels without a reward or direction to do so. They actually want to share. Turnover is reduced, hiring referrals increase. There are many metrics that you can choose from. And the most important thing, though, about creating that purpose is having some way to measure your impact, your progress. Without that measure, you really don't know if you're changing anything. Next slide. So the solution. So as I mentioned, pretty lofty goal. How do you make that happen? Well, you really need to think about your goal, and you got to break through. You've got to disrupt the status quo and reinvent internal communications at your company. And as I mentioned, we had a long way to go because we had that clinical, boring communication. So the first thing that we focused on was curating engaging content. And something that someone on my team used to say that really stood out to me and still does today is content is king and channel is queen. So first, focus on creating engaging content, but then you also have to think about the channel, because if your channel isn't working for your employees, it doesn't matter how great your content is. So you need to look at introducing new channels, potentially enhancing the channels that you have, and then also consider leveraging external channels, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever channels you know that your employees are using in their personal lives. Why not leverage those for your communication? Next slide. So on the screen, I have a quote that really stood out to me a long time ago, but it especially stood out after this story that I'm going to share with you. So you can see it's on the screen there. So the biggest communication problem is we do not listen to understand, we listen to reply. And if you really think about that, we were kind of taught that when we were children in school, and the teacher asks a question, you raise your hand immediately, and you're not really even thinking about what she's saying. You're just thinking about what your answer is going to be. We've all learned that, and it's to overcome. And like I mentioned, I want to tell you a story from my Kohl's experience where we had just completed a communication survey, and it was something we did annually. We did it usually 3 months after the company engagement survey. And our goal was to drill down into some of what we learned in the engagement survey, to truly understand what our employees meant when they said that they didn't have the communication they jobs. So we sent out the survey, and went through the results. And based on the results, it was obvious that stores were getting too much email. They all told us that they had way too much. So we felt really confident when we were looking at that we needed to cut email. So we did. We came up with a brilliant plan, we thought, to take communication that required. So, setting planograms, doing price changes, whatever, take that information, put it into this new system that we had found that was really cool, kind of a workload planning tool. And then we cut out messages that we didn't think were urgent, and we would put those in that tool as well. And then we cut out some things completely that we just decided weren't important and that employees didn't need to know. Maybe things like that store opening in San Antonio. Just kidding. Great about this. We reduced email by 50% or so. And we thought, awesome, we solved this problem. Stores are going to be so happy with us. So we looked to the survey the next year and we got terrible feedback. And it was because we didn't really listen. We heard one thing, we heard too much email, but we didn't really to understand what did that mean and what did they really want from us. So I definitely learned a big lesson there, that before making big decisions like that, you want to make sure that you really understand and that you're checking in with your audience to make sure that what you heard is correct. So listening is critical. So connecting back to this idea of listening, and like I mentioned before, your organization is going to be different than the organization that I've been in. So it's really critical to have a vehicle to get information from employees. And you can do it in many different ways. We talked about surveys, but one really great way to do it is just ask people. So in the companies that I've worked in, we started listening sessions where we asked managers to, with a group of employees, and get their feedback on communication topics, development topics, recognition topics, the things that were really important to them and that came through in the engagement survey. We would solicit feedback from them in that way. And by doing this, you're going to get much better information, and it will really help you develop the goals that you need to as an organization. One thing I will tell you is when you ask for employee information and you ask them to tell you their opinion, you got to make sure that you follow through, because the worst thing is asking for that information and then not taking action on that. Okay, so let's talk next about the engaging employees portion of it. And next slide, we've got a couple of videos here. We're just going to show you the one video on the right here, the Kohl's video, free after the call. If you get a copy of the presentation, you can go in and watch the other video as well. But we'll go ahead and play a portion of that Kohl's video, and then I'll talk a little bit about that.
My name is Nubia Lopez. I've been with Kohl's for 5 years now. I started working as an hourly area supervisor while I was going to school. My goal was to become a teacher. My dream was to change the world one student at a time. While I was going to school, I received an opportunity to be part of the MIT program, and I completed the program successfully, became an assistant store manager, and realized that I was doing what I loved at Kohl's. I was teaching. I was doing it every single day with my associates. It's a very exciting time for Kohl's. I think that we're doing things that we've never done ever before. The pillar that resonates the most for me is winning teams. It is about engaging and empowering your teams. As a store manager, my job is to develop and engage and empower my associates, my leaders, to give every single customer a great shopping experience every single day. My goal is to create a footprint every day, to go into my building and make a difference, for my associates to feel like they're in an environment that is welcoming, that is friendly, where they can enjoy what they do, where we can provide great customer service, great products to every single customer. I've been very lucky to have been surrounded by a lot of individuals who have not only supported me, but are very engaged, very driven individuals. I've learned a lot from them. I've learned that, a manager is not somebody that tells everybody what to do. A good manager is somebody that gives their teams all the resources that they need to be successful.
Great, thank you for showing that. So you can see from this video, this was actually not that long after we introduced the Greatness Agenda at Kohl's. And this was a great series for us. And we created this because, as I mentioned, we wanted to create that two-way dialogue. And this was a way for employees to tell their story, how it connected to the Greatness Agenda and our purpose. And it was really, we got great feedback from employees about this because they really felt connected to those employees and what they were talking about it, because maybe it was their story or similar to their story. So our objective with the campaign was to showcase our purpose and our values, help promote more of that two-way dialogue that I was talking about by hearing employees throughout the company and country. And that was one thing that we did that I think was really critical, is we didn't focus on just the area around the corporate office because it was easy. We had our team travel all throughout the country to talk to associates at different levels in different stores, districts, etc., so that our team members would hear from a variety of perspectives. It really helped employees make a connection between the work that they did every day and our larger strategic vision. So if you get a chance, watch that other video as well. It's from Bayshore Healthcare Clinic, and it has a similar idea. There's actually quite a few of them if you look online. I think a lot of organizations are kind of adopting that associate storytelling. So to continue with engaging employees and evolving your content, I think one thing that is really critical, most organizations have an intranet. And while there are a lot of other communication channels, a lot of organizations really want to drive their employees to the intranet because it's really one place that they can go to get a lot of information. So it's really critical to make sure that you're creating interesting content, top stories of the day. Make an effort to change your style of writing to be more of like a BuzzFeed or a Skim style. On the slide, you can see on the left, that's an example of a company intranet that's got a lot going on. There's obviously a lot of visuals, there's the resources there, employee spotlights, company news, etc. And on the right-hand side, I've got an example of an article that is written in more of a BuzzFeed or Skim style. And I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but it's a different way of talking with your employees that's more fun. It's more like you would talk instead of something that you're writing. And you want to make sure that in your content, you're always thinking about, as an employee, why should I care? Why did I want to read this? So let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about empowering leaders. So as I mentioned, when we were talking about our goal as an internal communications function, that we knew that we needed to empower our leaders in the organization, because employees expect to get that information from their manager. So something that we did, is just an example of what you can do, is we decided to weekly send our leaders in the organization, and that was managers and above, company-wide. And we had quite a few different versions of this, because we had stores, organization, credit, distribution center, and corporate. And we wanted to make sure that the information was relevant to each of those audiences. But in these communications, we focused on what they needed to know, what they needed to do, and what they needed to share. And we made that connection with each piece of information so that they could easily, in a weekly meeting, face-to-face, or a weekly call, organize their information in a way where they'd focus more on the things that they needed to share with their team. They would obviously have their kind of list of to-dos then, because they had a need to do. But this was a really great way to provide them that information that they needed to support their teams. If we go to the next slide, thinking about channels. One thing that I think we realized in the couple of organizations that I was in is that we needed to broaden our communication channels and vehicles, and really think outside the box on things that we were doing. Many organizations do CEO-led town halls, and that was something that we hadn't done. So we started doing that, and then we decided to stream it to all employees. We had leadership meetings twice a year that managers and above attended, but our team members company-wide didn't attend it. So we created Take It Back toolkits for employees that didn't attend. We also created quarterly meetings in a box for department leaders to share information with their teams about, our purpose updates, financials. We'd create a sizzle reel video so they could see everything that happened in the quarter, and it would also be an opportunity for recognition. And then on the right side of the screen there, you can see we created graphic displays. So in those environments, the corporate environments, the DCs, the credit centers, where they didn't have product that they could see and touch and feel, we created those displays. And sometimes it was just graphics. Other times it was mannequins and product in front of the graphics so that they could actually look at and feel and touch that merchandise. So those were just a couple of ways that we expanded our channels. On the next slide, we have an example of break room TV. And this is actually the reason that I'm a partner with Hughes, because gosh, I don't even remember how many years ago it was. It was over 10 years ago. At Kohl's, we realized we needed a way to communicate with our employees across the company differently than we had before. And we started a relationship with Hughes, and they showed us these digital displays, or break room TVs. And we loved it. And we decided to have a pilot for it. And you can kind of see on the screen what's included. We had a direct TV feed. We had on the left side, you can see there's a section where we had our corporate communications. We also had a section where store managers could share team messages, which a lot of times they used for recognition of their team, birthdays, announcements that they had in their stores. We also had a hashtag, it's hashtag Life at Hughes on the screen there, where you could have a live feed of anything posted with that hashtag. And then we had the time, date, local weather. But this was a really great way to share this information. We introduced this, like I said, in partnership with Hughes, and the features evolved. So what you see there today is probably different now today. We wanted to make sure that we were changing it up for employees to keep it interesting. And we always wanted to make sure that we had that direct TV feed because it's, you know, it's in the break room. So we want to make sure employees are able to enjoy their break time. But our goal was at the same time as they're, you know, looking at that direct TV feed, you know, maybe during commercials, they're looking at our messages from corporate, and then they're looking at the messages from their manager, etc. And it was really cool to see when we added that hashtag Life at Kohl's, and people were starting to see their messages posted on the TV. They loved it. That was recognition in and of itself, just being on the TV. We later added live streams of our town halls, like I mentioned before. So we would take over the whole TV for those live streams so that they could participate in the town halls. And we also added video messages from leadership that would play at a scheduled time throughout the day. So we'd select a couple of times and it would take over the whole TV and play those messages for our employees. This was a game changer for us. It was such a great way to share information with stores, and the feedback that we got from store managers, district managers, regional managers, they were all really engaged with us and giving us suggestions about how we could make it better. And we did that. We evolved it throughout the years, and Hughes was a critical partner in that for us. They were so great about helping us make those real-time changes and gathering feedback for us and helping us with boots on the ground. Next slide. After we introduced our break room TVs, we decided that we wanted to have something in our corporate environments where we were really focused on that hashtag piece. And so you can see in that picture there, our hashtag Life at Kohl's walls. And it was basically, I think it was 12 or 15 large screen TVs put together with this image on it. And we tested it first in our corporate office in Milwaukee, and based on the feedback and the increase in social sharing, we decided to roll it out to our other corporate locations, DCs, EFC credit centers as well, because it was making such a big impact. But the reason I show you this is because, you know, I talked about introducing new channels, but it's also important to look at those external channels. For the longest time, we didn't leverage things like YouTube, Facebook. We just focused on our internal tools, but adding and focusing on those external tools made a really big impact for us. Let's see. Sorry. So just a couple of things that I, wanted to talk with you about in regards to the hashtag Life at Kohl's and adding new channels. I think all of you have probably struggled with challenges of funding, support from leadership, potentially concerns about employee posts if you're considering allowing employees to share things externally. And, we went through all of that. We definitely had some huge opportunities. We pulled a group of partners together, HR, legal, leadership, operations, facilities. They were all included in a group to help us tackle our issues and work through those things. And part of it was that we needed to prove that it was going to make a positive impact on the organization. So we looked at data, we looked at engagement, we looked at positive and negative impressions externally, feedback from employees on the engagement and communication survey, and ultimately impact on sales, which is somewhat difficult to correlate, but we still tried to make that connection to sales. As I mentioned before, we did a pilot in our corporate office, tested it, learned, and then we rolled out then to our New York office and to the rest of the locations. But this is something that we were getting our increase in social media posts from our employees was doubling and tripling month after month once we introduced these tools. So next slide. In the example on the screen, I wanted to show just how all of our channels could work together on a message. And something that I learned probably about halfway through my communications role at Kohl's was to not be afraid to over communicate things. Now, when I say that, I don't mean send the same email 10 times. What I mean is that because everyone is different and likes to receive information differently, it's really important that you're sharing messages throughout all of your channels. So in case someone isn't on the internet, but they go in email, they'll find it. If they didn't go to the internet or see the email, but you put it on a screensaver, or maybe they saw it in a social media post, or they saw it in that graphic display that I was talking about, they'll see it somewhere. And I think this is especially critical for a topic like open enrollment, which is what this is. You need your employees to take action on this open enrollment, and it's critical for them for their benefits. Again, I think that it's important to think about how you carry your messages through all of your channels to make sure that you're hitting all of your employees. And something, that also is important to talk a little bit about is communications. A lot of time it's hard to really provide an ROI, but this was something that we were able to show an ROI, because instead of putting table tents and break room posters or paycheck attachments, we leveraged our digital channels, and we were able to save $130,000 a year on this one event that we had. And there were many other examples where we had to stop printing things and we could just share them digitally. And what a great thing too, to have digital communication channels instead of printing things. You can make real-time updates on things and not have to worry for things to be reprinted and resent to your locations. All right, next slide. So to kind of wrap it all up, I think that it is critical to define your mission, your purpose as a communications function. Decide what your measures are. Make sure that you understand your costs, and that your team really understands your goal. And at Kohl's, I had mentioned our engagement results were 68%. And a year later, we were at 75%, and our communication scores increased double digits. So we definitely made an impact. And when your engagement increases and your employees are happier, it means your customers are happier and your sales increase as well. So it's important to develop that goal and then to continue to evolve. Obviously, we didn't continue to focus on the same things year after year. We picked new focuses so that employees knew that we were still listening to them. Okay, so with that, I think we were going to open it up for Q&A.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, Lynn, I think this was fantastic, and we really thank you for sharing some of the industry best practices, and really appreciate you giving us, real examples from your days at Kohl's, as these employee engagement and employee communication tools are probably a must-have in today's new norm that the retailers and the restaurants are conducting their businesses in. So this is fantastic. We only have time for one question. So I'm going to pick one question out of the 4 or 5 that we received so far, and then we can close on that. We have recorded this session, folks, so you can visit HughesUserGroup.org to view this recording, and you can engage with us. You can send us an email if you have additional questions. Also, on corporate communications, we do have a landing page on our Hughes website, business.hughes.com/signage/corporate communication or corpcom. It has some tools and solutions that we can provide to our customers. So one question I'm going to pick, Lynn, is you talked about break room TV, and it was a really successful model, and it has evolved. I mean, you mentioned you probably implemented that about a decade back. So what's your advice for someone who's considering a break room TV solution today, especially in this environment?
Well, my first piece of advice would be, and they didn't tell me to say this, would be go to Hughes as your partner. I know that there are a lot of partners out there, but I truly believe that Hughes is the best. They have a great team that supports you along the way. I'd also recommend, having a really good idea of what you want before you reach out, but then being really open to their guidance and feedback as well, because they've got great experience with that, not only with Kohl's, but with other organizations as well. And as I mentioned, it made a huge difference. It was probably the biggest game changer in communication for us of anything we did when I was there.
Well, thank you. That's a great answer, and we definitely appreciate you, talking about Hughes. But we do work with. We are managed service providers who will work and create a solution that best fits your business model for success. So, folks, that's all the time we had. Thank you very much for joining, Lynn. Thank you again. This was a great session. We have some information on how you can engage with Lynn via Facebook, email, or LinkedIn. Everyone, be safe and have a wonderful day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.